How many of you in this room know Rajiv? A raise of hands, please.
See, many family things.
And Sonia's husband went to IIT Madras.
Yes.
And she has participated in IIT Mana events in the past, and she's back here today. So I'll leave it to them to go forward with this journey that Rajiv has had from the campus to the C-suite. Take it away, Rajiv and Sonia.
Thank you so much, Naren. And thank you, everyone, for joining this session. I'm sure you all are super excited to hear about Rajiv's story and his journey from campus to...
And now your mic is on. Okay.
My mic is... Shall I?
Yeah, good. Go ahead.
And you all are super excited to hear about his journey from campus to C-suite. And so am I. I'm looking to get inspired, and I want to really jump into the questions. And thank you, Rajiv, for doing this. This is so amazing.
No, I'm glad to be here. I think the last time I was doing one of these things, I think was 2019, I think pre-COVID, was it? Or 2018, I don't remember. You had another one of these events, I think, and it was fun. And I'm always enjoying being with my IIT buddies here and many of my friends in the room. Many of you I know and work with. It's great to be here.
That is super awesome. And you've had a remarkable journey. So first thing first, what does a typical day in your world look like?
There is no such thing as a typical day, I have to say, because every day is different. And the one thing I'll say is you have to be a jack of all trades and not really a master of anything, frankly, but you have to, every day is, there's a context switching because you got multiple things that you have to think about. You have to think about your employees, you have to think about your investors, you have to think about your customers, all the functions in the company, whether it's product or go-to-market. So my day gets divvied up across all of these things in some form or fashion. And I am on the road probably almost half the time out there with in the field with customers. So there's no such thing as a typical day here. Like I'm just, for example, this coming week we have our quarterly board meeting, so like board and committee meetings. So that takes up a few days in the week. And then after that, next week I'm off on the road. I'm in Asia for the entire week. So every week is different. Every day is different.
That sounds super interesting. Any personal habits or routine do you believe have most contributed to your success?
I'll say I'm fairly organized. And one thing that you realize pretty early on in this sort of a gig is, or even earlier in my life, is that at some point you have to actually, you succeed by making your team succeed. And so it's all about making sure you have the best people around you. You try to hire the best people and you empower them and you care about making them successful. So that's something that I try and do with my teams because that's what makes, frankly, my life easier, right? If they do well and they take care of things, my life becomes easier and I can go off and do the things I like. But in addition to that, I think you've got to be fairly organized. I mean, the biggest challenge, of course, is that there's so many different things going on at any time. And you just have to ruthlessly prioritize what you're spending time on. And I also have to be fairly quick to respond to things. So sometimes, for example, on an if somebody sends me an email, I try to respond within 24 hours because if not, it just gets buried. And so you have to be fairly organized. You have to prioritize things very carefully and make sure you're spending your time on the things that matter.
Awesome. Awesome. And what is your secret to staying relevant in this ever-evolving tech world and, the dynamics of it? So how do you do that?
I mean, for me, it's been always about keeping up and learning stuff. You can never be static.
Absolutely.
Our world is never static. Things keep changing, and you have to always continue to work hard to remain relevant. Because, for me, and you should also not be afraid about it. Many people have talked about on the career panel, I caught a bit of that when I was coming in. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to learn new things and evolve. So on a personal basis, I try to do that a lot. I try to keep up with what's going on. I try to, 2 years ago, we actually just started I know there's an AI panel, so we started a little bit of exploration into Gen AI, and look at how big it's become now. And I honestly didn't know much about it. I probably still don't know much about it, but know enough to say that's going to be important, and we've got to do something about it and make sure we remain relevant in the world of Gen AI. So as a company, for example, it applies to you as an individual. It applies to what you do in the company as well, right? The companies have to go through the same kind of thing to stay relevant. So you have many good companies that start out with a great idea and a great product, and they do really well, and some of them go public as well. But the ones that endure, in my view, are the platform companies that actually continue to evolve over time and keep changing. And those are the ones that can actually succeed. Even in our own example, at the company that I run now, Nutanix, we've been through, we're about 15 years old at this point, and got public in 2016. And we've changed what we do quite a bit. I mean, we are probably on our third innings at this point, I would say. We started out selling hardware appliances, creating a category, then we evolved to become a multi-cloud company, and now we're evolving to become a modern apps company going forward. And along the way, we've changed our business model, from selling appliances to selling software, now to selling subscription and SaaS. So all that stuff it's just a journey of constant change, and you have to keep at it if you want to remain relevant.
Absolutely. That's a very good advice. And talking about companies, what do you think are the biggest challenges today the tech companies are facing?
Well, that's a very, very broad question. I think it depends on what you guys are doing. I mean, if you're in a startup, you're trying to find product market fit. You're trying to stay alive, make sure you have enough cash on the books so that you can keep going. If you're at a point where you've got that product market fit and now you're talking about how to scale, and you have to figure out how to scale that business and build a repetitive selling motion so that you can actually go build. And if you're a company at reasonable scale, then you sort of go back to the previous question. How do you remain relevant and how do you keep going? Also what matters also changes, right? In terms of, if you look at just a few years ago in the public markets, companies were rewarded for driving growth at any price, right? Really, you could go in and burn a lot of cash. You could always have free access to capital, and you could continue to grow. And that's true for both public and private companies. That has changed quite a bit now. There's now a focus on having balance between both growth and profitability or free cash flow. Pick your metric, bottom line metric that you like. And you sort of now have to think about, okay, if you're a startup, when do you get to cash flow break even? If you're a public company, how do you operate on a rule of 40, which is the sum of your growth rate and your free cash flow generation? And so you have to now start thinking about how you balance stuff.
Awesome. And talking about emerging technologies, so what emerging technologies excite you the most and why?
Boy, I mean, I've got to give you a very cliched answer on this one, I think. I mean, I know there's an AI panel coming up here. And if you look at probably the biggest thing at this point in time, I mean, the Valley goes through every generation, I would say almost, or every decade. That's one big thing. And of course, the big thing these days is certainly generative AI and the potential. And to me, the broad potential of this is, of course, it can play a role in almost everything we do.
Yes.
Everything,
yes,
right? It's very
absolutely.
broad applicability, and I think that's why it's got important. I mean, it's much like we had the internet back in, the 90s, and before that, Silicon Valley got started with semiconductors, and so there's been a bunch of things, and there was also, one that I participated in, which was optical, right? That was a big thing for also kind of in the 90s leading up to the 2000s in terms of enabling the internet. So, there are all these wave after wave of technologies that come into play, and I think the one that's here and now is Gen AI, which, by the way, I think if you look at the cycle also, I think we're sort of at, we've come past a little bit of the peak of the hype cycle.
Yeah.
And now I think it's starting to get to a little bit more reality, and then, I think you're going to start to see more steady, real adoption.
Yes, true. And in midst of all this, if I may ask, Rajiv, what motivates you?
Yeah, I actually, where's my buddy Sundar there? He asked that question at the last panel, I see. That was actually a very good question. Because, and I can tell you that it changes actually depending on where you are in life.
Yes, yes.
Certainly, I'm at the tail end of my professional career, but I continue working. In fact, I have to say my father continued working. He retired from his government job at 58 or whatever, but he continued working till he was 78.
Wow. And
from 58 to 78, every day he would, he was with a non-profit. He would go to the office. Yeah, he would do what he was building houses for people. That's what he was doing for the next 20 years until he figured out he was getting Alzheimer's. He couldn't really do that anymore, and then he passed away 2 years later. But he was doing stuff that was fulfilling.
Yes.
And that's I think what I focus on, right, is what you're doing interesting to you. And I think Raghu said something good at the panel, right? I think a lot of what I would say would probably be similar to what he said, in the sense that what you want to spend time on things that you enjoy doing. And I've always enjoyed working professionally. Every step in my career, right, from my days, with my very first job back in the late 80s to now.
Wow.
So I enjoy doing what I'm doing, and that's why I'm in it. I don't have to do it, but I enjoy doing it, and it's fulfilling. And then there's also stuff that I do outside of work that is equally fulfilling. And as long as I have this balance between doing interesting stuff that I feel is relevant, it gives me, motivation to keep going. And then I have enough time to do other things which you have to carve out that also matter to you. So you want to spend your time on things that matter to you, because the thing that you realize, and it's become very visceral in the last few years for us, because you start losing your parents. We are at that stage where many of our parents are moving on. But in fact, many of the several people in my own batch that have passed away.
Yeah.
And you sort of realize that you have to make the most of life when you have it, and do the most, right? And that doesn't necessarily mean making the most amount of money or whatever, right? You have to do whatever is fulfilling to you when you can.
That's such a beautiful answer, and I'm sure the audience would agree to that. And if I may also ask you, what's your secret to handling high-pressure situations, especially in a role like yours with Grace? And we see that you do this a lot often.
Yeah, I think Mark Zuckerberg said this best. Every day in the morning he wakes up and shit happens. and it's kind of, after you've been at this for a while, right, you don't get fazed by all the stuff that can happen. There's so many, every day there's stuff that comes at you.
Totally.
That, I've learned not to get stressed out by this, because if you do, then your career is going to be pretty short. And so I don't get stressed anymore. It doesn't matter what happens. The sky could be falling apart. But what you have to do, I try and think about things very logically. And that's the one thing that IIT trained us to do, right? We're all very analytical thinkers, very logical thinkers. And you sort of learn to, okay, this has happened, or whatever is happening. What do you do about it?
Yes.
And what can you do about it? And so you look at it logically, you go about things in a very logical way, and you think about how you can move forward all the time. I have to sort of bring another quote about this in terms of handling stress that actually is very relevant. This is by the Dalai Lama.
Oh.
So one of the things he said was, there are lots of things in life that will worry you.
True.
And his solution to handle that stress was, this is what he said. He said, look, if something is worrying you, something is bothering you, think about what you can do about it and do it. Okay? Go ahead and do it. And if you don't think there's anything you can do about it, then stop worrying about it, because your worrying about it is not going to make the situation any better. So I look at that as actually great advice. And so you think about that in a very logical way. Whatever happens, you deal with it, and then you move on. And if you can't do anything about it, then you accept it and you try to move on.
That's an amazing advice. And how would you describe your leadership style? Like, given how with so many years of learnings you have. So how would you describe your leadership style?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've learned a few lessons, and most of them are not original. I will say I shamelessly copy from people I see, and try to make use of some of the things that benefit. So I'll probably say a few things that have stood me in good spirit. First of all, my style is, I'm generally pretty direct, pretty straightforward. First thing I'd say is, say what you're going to do and do it. Don't try to be, different, right? I mean, so I think, and that builds followership, and it builds trust, which I think you need very much, right? So you've got to be pretty clear-cut about that, and don't say something and do something else. And so that's an important thing. I already said about, how you sort of focus on hiring the best people and empowering them, give them the rope, make it clear as to what you want them to do, but let them go off and run and do it, because don't be feeling insecure. One of the first things I remember when I first became a manager, many, many years ago, you realize, I mean, the reason you became a manager is because you probably were the best technical guy and you got promoted to be a manager. But then you realize very soon that you can try and do everything yourself because you're technically competent at that stage. But as you grow up in the organization, you can't do that anymore. So you have to rely on others. And so you have to, again, like I said earlier, make these people successful. That's probably the second thing. Third is actually, I would say, you got to listen. Listen more than you talk, although I'm talking here mostly. So it's a very difficult thing for us to do, by the way. We all tend to talk. But if you listen, and you also listen to the people who are giving you constructive criticism. Don't, I mean, one of the things culturally for me also was, in India, of course, we're all pushed by our parents, right? If you get 90 on 100, you come back home, your dad's going to ask you, where's the remaining 10? And then you come here, and certainly for me it was an awakening. Everybody's patting you on the back and saying, great job, and so you sort of have to balance out that it's good to always give constructive praise, but it's also good to see constructive criticism, because that's what can help you become better. So these are some of the things that I've learned in my life, and I try to use that in my job.
That's awesome. Any particular philosophy that you go by, in your leadership style? Like, okay, this is something like to live with in all my.
No, I mean, look, I think what drives me, it's sort of also related to what drives me, is to say at the end of the day, whatever you're doing, you want to try and do it well.
Absolutely.
You want to try and make a measurable positive difference. Most of us here are in tech, I think. And to me, when you're in tech and you sort of think about what is the impact of the tech that you're doing, is that creating something better for society? Is that creating something better for the world? And if it is, then you can feel good about it. And I'll give you an example of, like, I think, a lot of stuff there that's I think, there's been lots of tech inventions that have done good. But I'll tell you, some are mixed also, right? It also depends on how you use. I think Bitcoin, for example, is a mixed thing.
Yes.
Obviously, it's great for easy transactions and so forth, but also encourages criminal activity. It's not particularly sustainable either, because you look at the amount of CPU power you need to mine these coins. So is it particularly sustainable? Not particularly. So it's an example of, in my view, I consider that to be a mixed bag. But you want to do sort of well at whatever you're trying to do and make a measurable difference. And then also think about, like, what you can do to make, leave things in a better place, whether it's, at your own company or to your own family or to the world at large, and try to, contribute your bit to it.
Absolutely. Any particular aha moment from your career that you would like to share with us?
I mean, when I think about aha moments, lots of aha moments, it's, I'd probably say, I have more fond memories of my early days back. I think when I started my career, it was actually almost under duress. I came to the US, I enrolled in the PhD program at Berkeley, and did a summer internship at IBM Research in Zurich. I was very lucky to get that, I think. Got to know some folks at IBM Research, and then I come back, and then my advisor says he's going off to be a VC, and I no longer have an advisor, and I have to kind of start from scratch. So I decided, let me go get a job instead. And so I got my master's degree, but I stayed enrolled in the PhD program, and I went to work at IBM Research, and probably one of the best decisions I made in my life back in New York. And so the aha moment there, I think, coming back to that was, I think that was a good decision in hindsight for me, because I ended up doing my PhD work while I was there.
Awesome.
Mostly with a professor from MIT. All my papers from my PhD days was this MIT professor, but I ended up coming back and getting a degree at Berkeley. And it was kind of an interesting thing. And so that was, I think, a good example of, like, making that call to say, okay, I've got to, I still wanted to do a PhD, but probably, what I did, I think, was sort of different from the rest. I also had to deal with a lot of the visa issues back then, by the way. We were all on F1 visas, and it turned out they had a year of pre-completion practical training that I made use of to go get my job at IBM, and then after that they got me an H1. And anyway, it all worked out very well.
Awesome.
The second moment, I would just say, I'll give you one more example, to me was, so we were doing research back in the day. This whole field of optical fiber communications was very new, late 80s at this time. I'm going back in time. And I think somebody else mentioned this earlier too, right? When something new is emerging and you can actually use sort of stuff that you learn in other disciplines and you try and apply it to it, there's a lot of fertile opportunity to do new stuff. So I was trained as a communications guy. That's what my work was. And then applying all this stuff to, this wireless communication was long, available. It's been there for many years, right? Since the days of Shannon back in the 40s. And so that wasn't new, but applying some of the same techniques to optical networking was pretty new. So I had a chance to do a lot of that, and one day we realized that we could actually take some of the stuff and build it into a product. And that actually was our first product, and I'm actually to this day pretty proud of that particular thing that we built, because it ended up being one of the first optical networking products in the industry, and this was back in 1994, 95. And I feel particularly great about the fact that we built this thing as a research team. It was my first product, and we had some marquee customers for it, and getting that first customer up and running and seeing that success. It turned out, I still remember, it was Morgan Stanley back in New York, and a lot of confluence of things came to make that successful, and that was still a very sort of moment that I cherish. Right? I look back and say, boy, what an experience that was.
Thank you for sharing that with us, and I'm sure many of the audience here can relate to that, such moments in their careers. So what advice would you give to the aspiring leaders?
I mean, that's a very broad question also, I think.
Like aspiring tech leaders, we have many of them here.
Of course, yeah, and many successful ones too here. So
yes.
It's, who am I to give advice to people who are doing pretty well? But I'd say, for me, it depends on where you are in your career. But for me, I'll tell you a few things that have worked, which I think should work for you. Always have a learning mindset. We talked about that earlier, right? Keep learning, because you have to keep learning new things. Even for me, when I got this job, there was a lot of learning for me to do. I had run big teams, I had even bigger organizations that I had been part of before and so forth. But there were many new elements in this job, and for me, one of the things that was particularly new was every quarter after my earnings, we had to go on, I had done earnings before too. I had done board meetings too, before at my other companies, but I had not done, going to CNBC or Yahoo or whatever right after every quarter and being there on, for a 5-minute broadcast interview where you have no idea what they're going to ask you about. And you have to be prepared, right? You get that 5 or 10-minute slot, maybe, prime time, and right after earnings, and they could ask you anything under the sun. And so that actually certainly was for me a learning experience of how to handle those. And I'll tell you, one of the things I did was I actually did go through some prep and coaching for some of this stuff. And you know what we did? We watched a bunch of presidential debates. Because the thing that you learn is it doesn't matter what question they ask, you get whatever you want to say out. And that works really well in broadcast media too, okay? So you learn to say, they'll ask you some question, okay, you sort of give something perfect, and then you very quickly switch over and say, in your 5 minutes, you want to get your key message out. It doesn't matter what they ask. And that then actually, I tell you, so that was certainly a learning experience. So anyway, so my point is, I think it's always good to be continuously learning. Always good. Every job that I've had has come through my network. So develop a network of mentors. If some of them can be your sponsors, even better, because I think that's fundamentally, I mean, like I said, every step for me has come through that. Even my very first job at IBM Research came from that. Not my network, but my advisor's network, more or less. But almost everything for me has come through the network. And I've had I've been phenomenally lucky to have some great mentors at many steps along my career. And those mentors have made me what I am. I mean, I'll give you one example. My very first manager at IBM Research, I was 24 years old at that time, I think, or 23 maybe. And he was just starting a new group. He was in his 60s at that time. And he had nothing left to prove, by the way, because he had, he was a big pioneer in the space. He was a guy who built the first cell phone receiver. His invention is in every cell phone that we carry today, for example. He was the first guy to map the surface of Venus with radar. So, he had nothing left to prove. But the thing that I learned from him was, he knew how to hire good talent and mentor them and make them successful. And he became very successful as a result of it himself. And this was a guy who had been through, multiple big things in his career and had done a bunch of things. And he mentored me, and he was very selfless in that in that regard, because he opened a lot of doors and allowed us to flourish, allowed me to flourish. I was one of the first employees hired into this new group that he was doing in optical networking. And he just gave us so much room to expand. He opened so many doors for us in the community because he knew everybody. And that helped me be very, get ahead, right, very, very quickly. So I would say seek mentors, and if they become your sponsors, even better, because a sponsor is somebody who's actually advocating for you. Mentor is somebody who's just giving you good advice. So I think that's the other thing I would definitely do in terms of what you should be thinking about doing. And then the other thing is, every time you think about doing something different, think about how that's going to be two things. One, it's going to stretch you and get you to do something that you haven't done before. And second, though, you do have competencies that you can bring that can help you in doing this. The risk level is much more doable if you actually can do, some competency, if you have some competencies that you can bring to whatever you're doing next. But at the same time, it pushes you so that it's still interesting and challenging enough for you. So you don't want to keep doing the same thing. At least I've never done this, right? Every several years, when I've gone and done something different, it has been something new. It has been something different where I've enjoyed learning new things. And at the same time, I sort of bring enough of a background to go be successful. I'll give you an example, maybe a couple of examples on that front. So I spent many years of my life at Cisco, and I was a technology guy, pretty much a tech guy until I got to Cisco, and somebody took a chance on me and made me a general manager of a group. Great. And that somebody was, by the way, Jayashree Lal, who I think some of you know here very well. She's now the CEO at Arista Networks, and also one of my mentors. And her husband, by the way, is also IIT Madras, Vijay Ulal. I don't know if he's here, he's not here. But no, that was a big difference, right? That was my first business experience. So a lot of learning for me, and at the same time, I knew the space and I knew the domain. And then after that, I did a bunch of other businesses at Cisco, which, again, I was no longer the subject matter expert. But I knew enough about how to run a business so that I could go run a completely different business. Sure. And then, Broadcom came calling. I think this was back in 2010. And it was a completely different space in the food chain, So I was, this was a team. I used to run teams of, software developers and hardware guys. And we used to build equipment, right? And now Broadcom was a chip company. And I was never a chip guy. But I did go to Broadcom. I spent 8 years there. And it was a new learning experience. But I knew, again, sort of the domain that they were in. So that example, I think, works very well when you're thinking about what's next and, bring stuff to the table that you can be competent about, but then have enough things that challenge you as well.
That's really helpful, and thanks for sharing the details of it. Building a successful career also comes with a lot of sacrifices. And I remember Raghu in one of the sessions talking about it as well, like, the personal sacrifices one has to take while building a successful career. So how do you maintain a work-life balance while leading a successful company?
Yeah. Before I get to that, I think I remember what Nitro said. He was working till 3 a.m. and so forth. Luckily, I don't think I've done that very often. Somehow I managed to get that work-life balance so that I don't kill myself along the way. I know that's very hard, by the way. And I'll tell you, though, the first thing for me in terms of achieving that, I have to thank my wife for it. Because we both had careers. And she had a master's in computer science. She was in the software business as well. And until we had our first child. And we had no other help, by the way. So we were on our own. And we both went back to work a few months after the baby was born. And even at that time, I used to travel quite a bit. And it became literally a nightmare. It was living through hell because every time the baby got sick and dealing with this. And it came to a crisis at one day when my wife fell asleep coming back. From a job, and she ended up crashing on the side. Luckily, uninjured, nothing happened to her, but it was a wake-up call for all of us, literally. Sorry about that, but it was a wake-up call. And so she made the decision at that point to quit. And ever since then, I think, frankly, my life got better. Her sacrifice made my life better. And to this day, I think I credit her with a lot of why I was able to move forward in life, right? And that's a very difficult sacrifice for somebody to make. And I'm not suggesting that every woman here make that or every man make that, right? But but in terms of the work-life balance, I call it work-life integration. It's not really, because these days, you're working from wherever you are, and you are, life and work are kind of integrated into what you do. You have to, again, it comes down to prioritize what you do. I make things outside of work that I care about, make time for those things that I truly care about. I do try and make sure, for example, I work out every day. And sort of that hour is sacrosanct for me now. Sometimes, I like to do it early in the morning, but if I have a meeting that starts at 7 a.m., that becomes very difficult for me to get it done. Then I try to find an hour sometime in the evening to go get it, right? So it's things that I care about, I think I do. I make it a point to be there for important family events and whatever they may be. So even if it means you have to sacrifice something at work, work will remain. It's not going to be the end of the world. And I can tell you that even today, running a company, it's still the case, right? I mean, you can always make time for things that you care about. It's all about prioritization. You sort of have to drop something else to do what you care about. And as long as you do that, I think I try to sort of maintain, there's this work-life integration that, and again, I think, I also have some routines. What I do is I don't finish my stuff. By the end of the day, there's still stuff left over that I know I need to catch up on. But I come home, I try to finish my meetings by 6 p.m., for example. I try not to do stuff after that if I can. Come home, we still try to get, a family dinner together. My younger son still lives at home. So we try to do a meal, the three of us, whenever possible, right, once a day. And after that, I have a routine where I usually do my New York Times crossword for a bit, and then I get back and catch up on emails, make sure that I'm kind of on top of what needs to happen the next day before I go to bed. So some of these routines also help, but I think it's ultimately up to each of us to sort of make sure that you're blocking out time for what you care about, and ruthlessly try and not do too much, right? I mean, the common thing we try and do is to take on too much, and we can't do it all. So you just have to prioritize and do what you care about.
Such an important statement, and also each one of us here can relate to that, how important it is to investing in our support system as well at the same time when we are getting so much from them. And that leads to my next question, and this question is one of my favorites always, and I keep trying to ask this question to as many people as I can. How do you measure your life? Like when you talk about it, it's a deep question, and at the same time, I also think that it's important to know that metric with which you are measuring your life, so that you are true to it. So how do you, like, if you have to pick, like, how exactly, what moments, or is it your professional success? Like, how exactly do you measure? And I'm sure for each one of us it could be different, but how do you do that?
I mean, that's actually a very, very good question. I have to say, first of all, the things that I, measure myself on is really, at the end of the day, life is more important than your professional career, okay? And so for me, the things that matter to me the most are my relationships with my family, my friends, and the connections that, that's what makes life, and it's ultimately, those things are more important than almost anything else. So that's my first measure. The second measure I think I alluded to, which is, the two measures I would say is, are you making a measurable difference in terms of, what you are getting done, right? Everything that I think about, I say, what is it like before and what's it like after? And has a needle or has a ball moved forward? And it applies to almost anything you do. It doesn't matter what it is. But are you doing something where you're making measurable progress in a good way? Whether it comes to work, and for me, also outside of work, right? Is there something that you can actually do to not just focus on your own work and doing better at work and doing stuff, but also, are there things that motivate you outside of work? And you have to pick whatever you care about again, and spend your time on that, and do whatever you can to make things better.
That's amazing. Now, little bit sprinkle on the IITM nostalgia. Like, I would love to ask you this: what is your favorite memory from your IITM days?
Well, again, there's so many favorite memories, and I think everybody here, all of you are going to have fantastic memories here from the times. If I go back, one of the things I remember is how addicted we were all to bridge back then, and we still are. The irony is 40 years later, every weekend we still play bridge. The same bunch of guys, pretty much the same IT guys in my class. We still get together, now more virtual than physical, but But many good moments. In fact, we were so addicted at that time, even before our quizzes and midterms and exams, we would be sitting there playing bridge into the night. It was that much of an addiction. So that was one of the many moments. But yeah, we can go on and on about a zillion moments from our days at IIT, and everybody here, I'm sure, will have their moments.
And also, what did IIT instill in you that you can attribute to your success? Like, I'm sure each one of you have here, but I want to know, like, what exactly do you think are the things that you got from IIT?
Yeah, I think it's less about all the technical knowledge that we acquired during our BTech days or MTech days or whatever. I mean, that is not the main thing, right? I think for me, the main things I got out of it, I think, was sort of a level of confidence. You go to an IIT, first of all, you're lucky to get in. You get in there and you do okay there, and then it sort of gives you the confidence to tackle the world. And do whatever else you're going to be doing with the conviction that you can figure things out. And that, I think, is a very important, sort of big, huge booster for you, right? The fact that you go through that experience and you come out and you sort of say, okay, now you can do stuff, and regardless of what we all end up doing afterwards. But I think that experience at IIT, I think, is I really got that out. The second thing I got out, of course, look, to this day, and I think all of us can empathize with that, is the network of friends that you made there, right? There's nothing like spending 4 years in a hostel, getting to know people, and all of these folks are lifelong friends. And what's ironical now, it's not just that we are best friends, our kids have become best friends. That's it's amazing. That entire next generation, they are like, many of my IIT friends, I mean, their kids and my kids are like best buddies. And it's just amazing to see that carry on through multiple generations.
That's so amazing to hear. And how do you think about giving back now, since, Yeah,
I mean, that's also a very personal choice, right? Everybody, again, as you get to a stage in life where I think you sort of feel like, okay, you've done well, you've gotten what you need to do. Now, what do you do, right? What keeps you going and what keeps you motivated? And for me, one of the things that keeps me motivated is, of course, continue to do well at work and take that to a better place. But what I do outside of work, again, everybody has their causes, and for me, I've focused on primary education. And we've been working as part of a charity. It's called One School at a Time. We've been doing this for many years now. It's probably 20 plus years at this point. And literally, we're focused on building rural schools in India. And these are, literally started out saying, let's go rebuild one school, right?
Yeah.
We started doing that, and it created a measurable difference to that community. And over the years, now we've scaled the organization quite a bit. These days, we build about 10 a year. And we've built about 100 plus so far, about 115, I think, as of last count. And we just had our benefit gala for this last weekend. And I have to say, a number of, Valley entrepreneurs, who really, have opened their wallets and really contributed, right? I mean, it's what keeps going. Think about saying, look, we are all fortunate to be where we are, right? Every one of us is truly fortunate in life to be what we are today. And for every one of us, I think, you also realize that, what's impact you can have afterwards. And so you have to have, I think you do what you think makes sense. Your costs may be different, whatever they may be, but I would say pick a cause that you care about, and again, use that as a way to make a measurable difference outside of work.
Wow, that's really amazing to know. Now I have a set of fun questions to ask you before I get to a lot more fun questions. So this one is, if you were given the opportunity to travel in time, where and when would you go and why?
I'd probably relive my IIT days. Come on. What other answer can you give him?
And also, what's one book, podcast, or resource that has had a significant impact on your career or life?
Yeah, I mentioned the Dalai Lama before.
Yeah.
There is this book called The Book of Joy. Anybody seen that? Anybody? Yeah? It's absolutely fantastic. Absolutely, it changed my life, really, literally. It's a conversation between the Dalai Lama and the late Bishop Tutu, Desmond Tutu, that they had in Dharamshala when Tutu and Dalai Lama were friends. And a week of conversations. and it's just full of priceless nuggets of wisdom that you can apply. You know, I mean, there's so many of them that I'll just give you a couple of examples there. One is that they say that happiness is a very transient state. Joy is much more an everlasting state. And what you should be thinking of is what gives you joy, and what they say is that the best joy you're going to get is by doing good to others. That's just one of the many things that they say, right? Another one that really I will never forget is there's a lot of suffering in the world, and you have a lot of suffering yourself. And their advice is, look, yeah, you may be suffering, but anytime you suffer, you think about somebody else outside, and I bet you they are actually suffering even more. So there is that story actually where the Dalai Lama was having, I think, a severe stomach pain and he was in a car. I think it ended up being a kidney stone or something. I don't remember the exact thing there. But then when he saw a beggar on the street as he was going by, and he started thinking about what that guy was dealing with, his pain went away, or he was better able to endure his pain. So I mean, there's an endless number of these nuggets all through that book. I highly recommend reading it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The next one is, if you could give your younger self one advice, what would it be?
I would say I wish I'd learned some of these life lessons earlier in life, and been better at applying some of these earlier in life. And a lot of these things, for example, I think I talk about how you should be looking to stretch yourself and do more. And maybe I spent too much. I didn't know any of this stuff back then. I perhaps spent maybe too much time during my first job. Right, I was at IBM for 9 years, and I probably should not have been that long. And then afterwards I ended up moving back to Silicon Valley, and that was a life changer. So again, I think reliving, if I could have made some of these life lessons earlier and actually acted upon them earlier. I wasn't particularly good at networking, or I was perhaps more of an introvert back then. And you realize actually that you have to do this in a very conscious way. And over time, now if you look at my Myers-Briggs profile, I was, the first time I did that, I don't think I was an extrovert. Certainly not when I was in IIT and when I was coming here for the first time. But now if you look at the profile, it says it's a very strong E. Okay. That's so you change, right, and you adapt, and so.
Great. And if you want to make one of your hobbies as a career, like if you want to turn one of your hobbies into a career, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I like to write, believe it or not. I mean, it's I don't get much time for writing these days. But I used to write about our travelogues. I used to write about family trips that we would make and so forth. So if I were not doing anything else, maybe I would write.
Awesome. So before I go on to our rapid fire question round, but I want to ask you this last question. What's a common myth about being a CEO that you would like to debunk for us?
CEOs are by no means superhuman. We are all human like everybody else. And we all have our vulnerabilities. We all have our insecurities. And I tell you, this notion of putting somebody up on a pedestal, it's not really the case, right? We're all just like everybody else. And I tell you, the thing that I will say is it is a pretty somewhat lonely world, because there's a lot of things that you can't really share, right, with people. You have to make calls, and those are weighty calls that have impact, and you're not necessarily sure about what the right choice is in many of these cases, because if the right choice were so easy, somebody else would have already made the call, and a lot of stuff that you have to make decisions on are, dilemmas, not necessarily clear-cut things. So it's a lonely world out there in terms of helping, think through this and make these calls. And I tend to, again, on some of these things, it's actually pretty difficult. I stew over these quite a bit before having to make the call. But you have to make the call, right? You can't sit on it, be indecisive.
Yes.
But I do stew on it, and I wonder, going back, am I making the right call? Am I not? Because it's going to impact some, think about it, right? You make a call to lay off a bunch of people. I mean, that's a life-impacting decision.
Yeah.
And the first time I had to do that, it was very, very, very difficult thing to do. And it still is every time, right? If you have to do something like that. So anyway, that's the life of a CEO. It's not easy, but it's like everybody else's life.
Thank you for sharing that with us. Now, I have some rapid fire questions. So what's your go-to productivity hack?
Respond to email within 24 hours.
That's awesome. What is your favorite tech gadget you can't live without?
Of course, my phone, iPhone. Can't live without it.
A dream tech innovation you wish existed?
Time travel.
Wow. What?
Time
That's
travel.
a very
Imagine if you could all have time travel. You could go back and do all the stuff that you missed. Life is good, yeah.
What's
And you
your
could probably even fix things that you didn't do right.
Yeah, instead of going onto social media apps, you could just go into relive those moments.
Yeah.
So what's your go-to motivational quote?
Yeah, it's kind of related to the Book of Joy, but it's actually somebody else who did this. This was a Catholic preacher who said this. It's not happiness that gives you gratitude. It's gratitude that gives you happiness.
Wow. Favorite way to unwind after a busy day?
Have dinner with my family. Do the New York Times crossword after.
What's one piece of tech you think is overrated?
I think social media overall, I think, is overrated.
If you had to describe your leadership style in one word, what would it be?
Direct.
That's awesome. Who in the tech world do you admire the most?
Boy, that's a tough one. There's lots of people I admire. But I have to say, just given my personal experience, my very first boss, his name was Paul Green. This was a mentor that I talked about.
That's awesome. Which Marvel or fictional character do you associate most with?
I tend to go for imperfect characters, not the classic heroes or the classic thing. I'd say one of the characters, interesting ones, is Lisbeth Salander. Have you read The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo? Yeah, there's 3 books in that series. So she's a very imperfect character. She's a heroine, but she's not a typical heroine. And I admire those types of complex characters that have their, they're not infallible. They have their vices, they have their imperfections, and yet, on the net plus, they do good.
And your favorite travel destination?
I have to say Africa.
Amazing.
Multiple safaris. We've been on multiple safaris, and it's just absolutely phenomenal experience. I mean, if you like animals, it's just nothing like it. And it's also, you're decompressing. You're not in any place close to anything. You're in the middle of nowhere. And it's just fantastic. One of my most fantastic experiences was we were just recently in Botswana and South Africa, and I had the chance to go out on a bush run. So that is quite fun. You go out on a run in the bush, and of course, that you take appropriate precautions. There's a guide is running in front of you, and then there's a vehicle following you, because if you see any animals, you better get into the vehicle.
Very adventurous, I would say.
And they do it in the middle of the day when most animals are sleeping. So that's you don't want to do it early in the morning or at sunset.
So what's your most proud achievement so far?
I look at this and say I've been fortunate enough to have a great family, a loving wife. We've been married for 33 years now. Wow. 2 kids who are doing well, thank God. And that's really, I think, what makes me more proud than anything else, right? All this work stuff that we do.
So amazing. That was the end of my set of questions, and I'm sure there are many in the audience who would like to ask their questions.
I'm also aware that many of it's 1:30, and I don't know how many of you are hungry. But anyway, go ahead, Naren.
First of all, let me thank Rajiv and Sonia for giving us this wonderful opportunity to listen to what you have to say. I saw Rajiv first, probably in the mid-90s in your Broadcom time, and you were on a panel, and I went home and told my wife, this guy just impressed the heck out of me. So,
thank you.
Thank you for being back here. I think we are tight on time, so if there's one pressing question that somebody has. Yeah?
Hey, Rajiv, great talk. So I'm a founder of an AI startup. Dheeraj passed on the baton to a professional CEO. Mohit recently passed on as well as a founder of Cohesity, right? What are some of the advices you'd like to give to founders like us, do's and don'ts, before we pass on that baton to a professional CEO like yours?
So, this is actually a very good question. Sometimes that baton is forced, and sometimes it's not. It's rarely actually, it's rare actually when a founder realizes that it's time to hand over the baton. A lot of people actually like to hold on to stuff, right? And long past the time, actually. And you ideally, it's not an easy thing because it's your baby. If you're a founder of a company, it's your baby. You put in your blood, sweat, and tears into it for so many years, and it's very hard to necessarily let go, right? And it's not clear that you need to let go. But then I think you have to sort of figure out what's best for the company. Are you the right person to take it forward up to, beyond a certain state? And you have to have a very clinical analysis of that, right? Are you the right person? Honestly, not just because it's your baby, but will this be better with somebody else? It's very difficult for a founder to actually make that judgment. Often it's the board that's sitting there that ends up, if it's a VC-led board and stuff like that, they might make those choices. And I tell you, and every one of these transitions is somewhat different, right? And both Mohit and Dheeraj, I think they're great at starting companies, and both of them actually have new companies that they've started, and doing quite well, right? I mean, and they've done very well in the past. And I think, it's different. The skill sets required to go from say 0 to 100 million or 0 to $1 billion even. In Nutanix cases, it went very quickly. I think we were one of the first companies to get to $1 billion in revenue, but then it stalled. But the skill sets to scale are different from the skill sets to incubate. And you sort of have to realize, are you the right person or not to take that forward and scale things? And some people are, and there are. I mean, like I was just with Jay Chowdhury over the weekend at our charity thing. He was our keynote, and you look at him. I mean, he was the founder of Zscaler, and in fact, this is his 4th startup, and every one of it, by the way, he put his own money in. Did not raise any VC money at all. And he actually owns 40% of Zscaler or something like that. And he's still the company CEO, chairman, and founder. And they are like at, I think, a $20 billion or $15 billion market cap right now. So it depends is the answer. But you have to consciously make that choice, or it'll be forced upon you. And you don't want to ideally let it get to be forced upon you, because by the time it's forced upon you, things have already gotten bad. Right? Something is wrong, something has happened. That's why the board may choose to actually make that call.
Thank you, Rajiv and Sonia. A nice round of applause for
Thank you, guys.
your keynote speaker from today.